Hey, Leonard, welcome back to the Emily Show. A bit of a different episode today, which I'm going to tell you about because we are going to be getting into trial. I did not think this trial was necessarily going to be getting underway, but it's happening. Trial is starting Monday, August 17th for the murder of Tupac Shakur in Las Vegas in 1996. Yes, September 1996, almost exactly 30 years ago. We talked about this indictment when it happened, but we've got more to talk about. And then I'm going to include the episode from 2023 when Keffe D was indicted. So let's get into it. I'm legal analyst Emily D. Baker, yes, also a lawyer, and this is The Emily Show. I break down the pop culture, entertainment, and high-profile cases that we're all talking about. I know you want the facts, so let's get into it. Leonard, I thought that today a quick overview of the trial that's about to start with opening statements in Las Vegas would be helpful, because I think since the indictment in 2023, there have been some intervening things that have slowed this case down, including Keffe D changing lawyers a couple of times. He had an intervening fight in custody and was prosecuted for that. So there have been some things that have delayed this case from going to trial. And now it finally is. Almost exactly 30 years after Tupac Shakur was murdered in Las Vegas while in a car being driven by Suge Knight, Keffe D is finally going to trial for murder on an aiding and abetting theory. The prosecution is not alleging that he was the gunman in this case, but that he provided the gun, encouraged the killing, and was really the orchestrator or the shot caller of this event. And some of you might be asking, why is this going to trial 30 years later? And as I talk about in the episode a little bit later, it's because circumstances have changed. What are those circumstances? Well, Keffe D wrote a book about the murder of Tupac called Compton Street Legend. And his book was published in 2019. And in 2023, he was indicted in large part, I think, based on what he said in this book. And recently, the judge ruled in pretrial motions that things said in this book would be used in trial. And not only things said in this book, but things said in interviews to LAPD years ago. Now, at the end of Keffe D's book, Compton Street Legend, he talks about a deal that he did with the feds. He talks about the fact that he doesn't like the streets calling him a snitch. And he talks about the fact that he feels that this book has been therapeutic to get this off his chest because he's been living with this shit for 30 years and people have the wrong idea. And now it's his turn to tell his story. What it seems that Keffe D did not remember is that any deal he might have had with the FBI, that deal was with federal prosecutors, not state prosecutors. And so Clark County, Las Vegas, has come in to prosecute this, not just based on what was said in the book, but I think that that was the final things that pulled this together. Otherwise, they would have prosecuted him closer in time to when this happened. It seems that one of the arguments Keffe D is going to make is that the book was made with a collaborator or a ghostwriter. The name's on the book, so it's not a ghostwriter because it's a collaborator. But he was arguing that he just put his name on this for money. However, there are so many indications in this book that it is a first-hand account of his role in the Southside Crips, his role in what went down this evening, and his opportunity to tell his story. As he says on page 2, in the past couple of years, there have been several TV specials, documentaries, newspaper, magazine articles, and numerous websites dedicated to the subject of who killed Biggie and Tupac. But at the end of the day, none of the private investigators, retired police officers, informants, hip-hop heads, actors, or academics who have weighed in on the topic know what really happened and the reasons behind it. None of them were there. I'm the only living eyewitness to Tupac's killing, who also knows the much larger story around the reasons why both Tupac and Biggie were killed. I was considered a prime suspect in both the Biggie and Tupac killings for years. I know the real fucking story. He goes on to say on page 11, Keffe D is my name. Suge Knight and I are the only living eyewitnesses to what truly happened on September 7th, 1994, on the Las Vegas Strip between the occupants in our two vehicles. This deadly confrontation would change hip-hop history and my life forever. It'll be real interesting to see if they bring Suge out of prison in LA to testify against Keffe D. Keffe D talks about Suge Knight quite a lot in this book, talks about the fact that they played Pop Warner football together, talks about how he knew Suge when he was coming up, and talks a lot about his involvement with Sean, P. Diddy, Puffy, Combs, who is also on the witness list. And Keffe D alleges in this book that it was in fact Diddy that put out the hit on both Tupac and Suge Knight. So, will we see Diddy testify in this trial? Will we see Suge Knight testify in this trial? Will we see Keffe D take the stand in his own defense and say, nah, that whole book's bullshit. It's all hyperbole. It's enhanced for literary value. And I guess the real question is, in writing this book to say that nobody really understood the full circumstances of him working with the feds and he isn't a snitch, did he in fact self-snitch so much that he's going to walk himself right in to a murder conviction that could land him in prison for life or for 20 to life or for a fixed term of 50 years, depending on what Vegas wants to do? We're going to be in trial. Make sure you stay tuned in the Law and Order app. Now let's take a look back to 2023 when I talked about this indictment. So I first feel like I need to disclose that I was an LA County District Attorney. All of you know that, but this is a case that I have looked at not just as a district attorney and from that perspective, but it does come from that perspective. We're going to be talking about, Los Angeles gangs. That is something that I worked with. And then I grew up in Los Angeles. So 1996, the killing of Tupac was something that impacted everything in California, or at least it felt that way to me. So I have multiple levels of interest in this case. And I think a lot of you probably do too, because I feel like we're all just generally around the same age. And this was a pivotal moment for a lot of us that we remember when Tupac died. So it's an interesting thing talking about this prosecution and the fact that there's actually going to be a prosecution and an arrest. The gang wars in Los Angeles in the 90s are wild. And the East Coast, West Coast feud that this all touches on is also wild. And everything really tied into this case comes from Los Angeles, though the killing happened in Las Vegas. So for those of you not super familiar with this case, I think it would be helpful to go through the arrest, the indictment, and what the police have said about it, but maybe a brief road so far. And I'm going to just kind of break down what the police shared in their press conference. On Friday, September 29th, Las Vegas police gave a press conference indicating that they had arrested and indicted Keffe D for the murder of Tupac. We're going to go through the indictment in just a few minutes. This is for the 1996 shooting that occurred on the Las Vegas Strip after a boxing match. The police broke down a fight that had occurred inside the MGM earlier in the night where Tupac and Suge Knight and others had jumped Keffe D's cousin. But as police broke down in their press conference, these are rival gang sets from Mob Piru for the association with Death Row Records and Suge Knight and Tupac, and then from the Eastside Compton Crips with regard to Keffe D and his family members and other associates. So there was that fight earlier in the night, and then the shooting on the Las Vegas Strip, but that's predicated from earlier fights that had happened in Los Angeles before they all traveled out to Las Vegas. In the police press conference, they indicated that the book really reopened the investigation for them. They subsequently got search warrants. 3 years after the book was published, they got search warrants. Once they got search warrants, that led them to the additional evidence to tie this together. What is so interesting about this is not new. In his book and in interviews since the book, Keffe D has talked about the fact that he was interviewed by the feds back in 2010 and told them what he knew. And they agreed to throw out a narcotics indictment because he was at the top of the chain running drugs in Southern California. So they tore up his indictment and gave him a deal, which was essentially a no prosecution deal, for information regarding this. What's going to be interesting is seeing if and what the feds promised, because the feds aren't prosecuting him for the murder of Tupac. Las Vegas PD is. They can't use what he said in his interview with the feds if that interview was part of a plea deal or a non-prosecution deal. But he tells you in his book what he told the feds. That is fair game. So he wouldn't have been able to have been prosecuted based on what he told law enforcement, but then he put it all in a book that was published before he passed. So he can absolutely be prosecuted, but there needs to be more than just what he said in the book, right? Books aren't under oath statements. They can be hyperbole. And what I got asked a lot on social media about in DMs and even in conversations with others is, what about the fact that you can't, or there are rules in some jurisdictions about using rap lyrics and things like that in prosecutions? And when we're looking at legislation and case law regarding using lyrics in prosecution and protecting the First Amendment and self-expression, there's generally a burden to show that the lyrics are regarding the specific thing, not just a vague or hyperbolized generalization of something when it's a very specific thing. This book starts with, I'm one of the only living eyewitnesses to Tupac's killing. So it's not hyperbole, it's specific, but there's going to have to be more than just what he said about the killing. But he lays out who's in the car, how he got the gun earlier in the evening, where he obtained the gun from, where he hid the car after the shooting, how they got the car back to Los Angeles. All of it is laid out in this book. So they need other corroborating evidence before they can prosecute it. And I'm interested what they found in that search warrant. Police said that in the search warrant, they took boxes of photos, gun casings. Tell me that he did not save gun casings for 27 years. That would be wild to me if it comes out that some of the casings that they removed from his home were mementos. Then you have digital forensics that was pulled out in addition to the physical evidence and the boxes of photos and stuff like that. So when Las Vegas police announced that they had arrested Keffe D, I was not surprised. The extent to which they relied on his book was probably a surprise to him, because I wonder if he thought after the deal with the feds, they could never prosecute him for this crime again. I really do wonder if there was something where he's like, hey, I've already told them this in 2010. Law enforcement already knows. They gave me a deal. They're not prosecuting me, and didn't realize that though the feds might have made that deal for a federal prosecution, that doesn't limit state police from bringing a state level prosecution. That should have been a conversation with his lawyer maybe before this book came out. But also, if you're going to publish a book where you talk about being a participant in a murder, maybe run it by your lawyer before publishing, or maybe set the book to be published posthumously so that there are not those types of consequences for what you've done. Murder doesn't have a statute of limitations, so it doesn't matter that it's been over 27 years. Let's take a look at the actual indictment. This was posted on Twitter by Megan Kuneef, who is a law and crime reporter who covers courts in Los Angeles. So going to the body of the indictment, it says defendant above named Duane Keffe Davis. They don't say AKA Keffe D, but AKA Keffe D, accused by the Clark County grand jury of crimes. Now, we know this was an indictment. There will not be a preliminary hearing. And the prosecution in their press conference said that this grand jury had been reviewing evidence for months. So this was not a fast grand jury. This took a substantial amount of time. So the grand jury indicted on the crime, murder with use of a deadly weapon with the intent to promote, further, or assist a criminal gang. So this is a murder with a gun allegation, with a gang allegation, committed at and within the county of Clark, state of Nevada, on or about the 7th day of September, 1996, as follows: did willfully, unlawfully, feloniously, and knowingly, and for the benefit of and at the direction of or in affiliation with a criminal street gang, to wit, the Southside Compton Crips, which had one of its common activities engaging in felonious criminal activities, other than the conduct which constitutes the primary offense, that the defendant with the specific intent to promote, further assist the activities of the Southside Compton Crips gang with malice aforethought killed Tupac Shakur, a human being with the use of a deadly weapon, to wit, a firearm. So all of that language is the language really of the statutes that are the gang allegations. And if you think of RICO allegations or allegations that are used to go after any type of organized crime, it's to show that this is within the realm of what that organized crime organization does. Page 2 of the indictment says, shooting at or in the body of said Tupac Shakur and killing having been willful, deliberate, and premeditated, the defendant being criminally liable under one or more of the following principles of criminal liability, to wit, 1, by directly committing this crime, and or 2, by aiding and abetting in the commission of the crime. So it's giving a jury, ultimately, when this goes to trial, two theories of liability. Either the jury finds that he is the one that directly committed the killing, directly pulled the trigger, or he helped in the commission of the crime. And his book indicates that he procured the gun after the fight in the MGM Grand. So when you're looking at aiding and abetting, handing someone else a weapon that then they shoot and commit a murder is going to be aiding and abetting. And it goes on to define aiding and abetting with the intent that the crime be committed by counseling, encouraging, hiring, commanding, inducing, and or otherwise procuring the other to commit the crime, to wit, defendant obtaining a firearm for the purpose. Emily, you should have kept reading. Emily, keep reading. They're going to lay out their theory of aiding and abetting in the indictment. Just keep going. To wit, defendant obtaining a firearm for the purpose of seeking retribution against Tupac and or Marion Knight, aka Suge Knight, and while in a vehicle with Terrence Brown, aka Bubble Up, and or DeAndre Smith, aka Big Dre, and or Orlando Anderson, aka Baby Lane, did provide said firearm to DeAndre Smith, Big Dre, and or Baby Lane with the intent that said co-conspirators commit said crime, and or 3, pursuant to a conspiracy to commit a crime with the intent that the crime should be committed, defendant along with Baby Lane, Big Dre, and Bubble Up. And that is the indictment in this case. What we learned from the indictment is that they are really focusing more on the aiding and abetting and furtherance of the gang allegations, not alleging that Keffe D is the one who pulled the trigger. Everyone else that was in that vehicle, everyone else named in this indictment, is deceased. So there is literally, for everyone involved in these two vehicles, there is Suge Knight, who is in custody, and there is Keffe D, who is now in custody. Everyone else is deceased. So it will be very interesting to see how this prosecution moves forward, if they have statements already procured from anyone, if they have, and what physical evidence they have, because law enforcement in their press conference said that they, after the search warrants, had done quite a lot of interviews, and what those interviews contain or look like and who those interviews are with will be very interesting, because everyone who was an eyewitness except for Suge Knight is deceased. But if you are interested, there are interviews with Keffe D on YouTube. There is the book that he put out that talks about this, but he's also talked about everything in this book in interviews. So the thing with gang cases, they are going to have to bring gang experts in from Los Angeles, because the gangs that you're dealing with, Mob Piru and Eastside Compton Crips, are Los Angeles gangs. So the experts and the gang detectives who know these gangs are going to be based out of Los Angeles. And I imagine Las Vegas PD has in the past and is currently working with Los Angeles gang prosecutors. What's interesting is how long ago this all took place. The gang situation in Los Angeles in the late 90s with death row records is wild when you go back and look at the police that were prosecuted, prosecutors who were prosecuted, the Rampart Division, and everyone that was working with death row. Is a really wild time in not just rap history, but also in Los Angeles history. It really is wild if you are interested in looking into all of this. But what really precipitated this killing based on, well, everything that I've read, is a disrespect between these two gangs that started before the killing of Tupac, and then the outrage over some of the lyrics in some of Tupac's song and the disrespect that the Eastside Compton Crips felt based on those lyrics. And that is not surprising. So in all, I'm surprised that there was an arrest. I'm not surprised at who was arrested. I am very interested to see if they are going to try to bring Suge out from custody and have him testify in this, since he is in custody. I don't know what they're going to do, because back in 2018, Suge Knight got 28 years. It's very strange for me to dive back into all of this, because with working in Long Beach, a lot of the Compton gangs there's a lot of intermingling between what is going on in Compton and what was going on in Long Beach gangs where I worked. Some of the DAs that I have worked with and known were involved in some of these other prosecutions and prosecutions connected to all of this. So it's a very interesting thing to be looking back at after my career working with all of this and then growing up through it. It's wild stuff. So did I think there would be an arrest? No. This man has been talking about the fact that he was in that car for decades and there was never an arrest. How will this prosecution go? I'll be very interested to see. The first part of the book, the first chapter, gets into a detailed account of Keffe D leaving the MGM, running into Zip handing him a, quote, 17-shot pistol, which I promptly put down the back of my pants. I hopped out of the car, held the door open for Foxy Brown to get back in, closed the door, then pulled off. Get in the car you came in, let's roll, I shouted as our cars came out of LA. We left immediately from the MGM parking lot and headed directly to Club 662. And then he goes on to say that they pulled around the back of the club and were waiting to confront Tupac, and that there was a $1 million bounty on Tupac and Biggie Smalls. So these are absolutely delineating what happened that night, if it is corroborated by other things, which law enforcement indicated that other interviews, physical evidence, and physical evidence from the night of corroborated it. What I am looking for the most in this prosecution, the question I want answered is, so Keffe D spoke to the feds in 2010. He released this book in 2018. From 2018 to 2023, what evidence, physical or otherwise, that corroborated what is in his memoir, what evidence connected him to the killing of Tupac such that they were comfortable moving forward to a grand jury and to a prosecution? I am very interested to see that. I'm also very interested to see if Keffe D will try to argue that his deal with the feds precludes this state prosecution, and it's really going to hinge on what the feds said to him and what was promised. So I will be very interested in this story. I hope you are too. This is a case we will be covering for sure. Well, Honored, I hope you feel ready for this trial. It should last about 2.5, 3 weeks. And remember, this trial is going to be streaming in Vegas. So we're on Pacific times. The days are going to start a little later than normal trials, which is great for me at the end of this summer to start stream a little bit later in the day. I love it. We also have a new notification feature in the app that will take you directly to YouTube that you're going to see us rolling out during trial. It's a much faster way to get you right to the video when the witnesses that you want to see take the stand, because I am very curious to see how this is all going to unfold. I look forward to seeing you on stream for opening statements later today. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being honored. We're in trial.
Bring the jury.
Thanks for joining me. If you enjoyed this episode and don't want to miss updates on your favorite cases, you're going to need the Lawnerd app at lawnerd.app.com. That way you can stay in the loop on the cases that matter most to you, and you never know when you're going to catch feelings for a new case. So make sure you get it for free on iOS and Android. Thank you for being here, and thank you for being a Lawnerd.